The foreclosure notice arrived on December 18th, 3 days before Christmas, printed on paper so crisp it felt like mockery. Rachel Kovacs stood in the hallway of her Minneapolis apartment building, mail trembling in her hands while her daughter Mia pressed against her leg, small fingers clutching the worn fabric of Rachel's work pants. The words blurred together. Through tears, Rachel refused to let fall where Mia could see them. Final notice. Eviction proceedings. 30 days to vacate. She'd known it was coming. 6 months of missed rent couldn't hide forever. But knowing and experiencing were different countries, separated by an ocean of hope that had finally run dry. Mia tugged her sleeve. "Mama, you're squishing the mail." Rachel loosened her grip, forced her face into something resembling calm. "Sorry, baby. Just tired from work." The lie tasted familiar. She'd been serving lies to her daughter for months now. Small ones meant to preserve innocence. "Yes, we have enough food." "No, Mama's not worried. Everything will be okay." The apartment behind them was already mostly packed, boxes stacked against walls like a countdown to displacement. Rachel had started preparing weeks ago when the landlord's threats turned from vague to specific. Better to control the leaving than be dragged out by strangers in uniforms. Her phone buzzed. Text from her boss at the diner. "Need to talk. Come in early tomorrow." Rachel's stomach dropped. She knew that tone, had heard it in her previous boss's voice right before being let go from the hotel cleaning job. "Not enough hours to justify keeping you. Budget cuts. Nothing personal. Always nothing personal when they took away your ability to feed your child." She deleted the message and pocketed the phone. One crisis at a time. Inside the apartment, the heating had cut out again. Rachel could see her breath, could see Mia's lips starting to purple. She wrapped an extra blanket around her daughter's shoulders and started the oven, leaving the door open, a dangerous trick she'd learned from other desperate tenants, trading fire hazard for hypothermia prevention. Mia sat at the small table, coloring on the back of junk mail, because new paper was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Mama, can we have hot chocolate?" "Not tonight, sweetie. We're saving the cocoa for Christmas." They had exactly 3 packets left, rationed like medicine. Christmas was in 3 days, and Rachel had already decided Mia's present would be the thrift store coat hanging in the closet, purchased 2 months ago, when Rachel still had hope of making January's rent. The eviction notice sat on the counter, demanding attention. 30 days meant mid-January. Meant Mia would be displaced in the middle of winter, in the middle of first grade, torn away from the few friends she'd made, from the teacher who finally understood why Mia struggled with reading. Rachel thought about shelters, about the wait list she'd already called about the reality that Minneapolis had 2,000 homeless families and 400 shelter beds. The math was simple and brutal. She thought about her sister in Phoenix who'd stopped returning calls after Rachel asked to borrow money the 3rd time. About her mother who'd remarried and moved to Florida, sending birthday cards but no support. About being completely, utterly alone, except for a 6-year-old who still believed her mother could fix anything. The email arrived at 9:47 p.m. while Rachel was trying to make dinner from the last can of soup and half a sleeve of crackers. Her laptop, a refurbished model from 2014 that took 5 minutes to boot up, finally loaded her inbox with painful slowness. The sender was unfamiliar. Nordstrom & Associates, estate attorneys, Duluth, Minnesota. Rachel almost deleted it as spam. She had no business with estate attorneys, no dead relatives with inheritances waiting. But something made her click, maybe desperation, maybe the particular kind of hope that emerges when you have nothing left to lose. "Dear Ms. Kovacs, our office represents the estate of Magnus Lindstrom, deceased November 28, 2024. Public records indicate you are his sole surviving relative through your maternal grandmother, Astrid Lindstrom Kovacs. Mr. Lindstrom's will designate his entire estate to his closest living blood relative. We have verified through genealogical research that you are that person. The estate consists of one property, a commercial structure in Ely, Minnesota, known locally as the Ice Palace. The property has been abandoned for approximately 15 years and carries significant back taxes totaling $14,750. Mr. Lindstrom's final instructions state that if you wish to claim the property, You must pay these taxes within 60 days of notification and appear in person to sign transfer documents. If you choose not to claim the property, it will be sold at public auction to satisfy the tax debt, with any remaining funds donated per Mr. Lindstrom's instructions to the Ely Historical Society. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Harold Nordstrom, ESQ. Rachel read it 3 times, each pass revealing new impossibilities. An inheritance from a relative she'd never heard of. A building in a town she'd never visited. Back taxes that might as well have been $14 million for all her ability to pay them. But underneath the impossibilities lay one fragile fact. Someone had left her something. After a lifetime of having nothing given freely, someone had thought of her, had chosen her, had offered escape. She pulled up Google Maps and typed the Ice Palace, Ely, Minnesota. The satellite view showed a structure on the outskirts of town, large, oddly shaped, surrounded by empty lots and what looked like forest. No street view was available. No business listing. No reviews. Just a building that existed in records, but not in recent digital memory. Ely itself was small, maybe 3,000 people, tucked against the Boundary Waters, 5 hours north of Minneapolis. The kind of place tourists visited in summer for wilderness experiences, but locals endured in winter when temperatures dropped to 30 below and stayed there for months. Mia appeared beside her, standing on tiptoes to see the screen. What's that? A building someone left to us. Like a present. Maybe. Rachel zoomed in on the satellite image, trying to divine meaning from pixels. The structure was rectangular, possibly 10,000 square feet, with what looked like damage to one corner. The roof appeared intact, but the image was dated 2019, 5 years old. Anything could have happened since. Can we go see it? The question was innocent, obvious. Of course they should go see it. Except going meant gas money they didn't have, time off work she couldn't afford, the risk of finding nothing but a worthless ruin and wasted hope. But staying meant eviction in 30 days, meant shelters, or her car, or decisions no mother should have to make. Rachel pulled up her bank account, $287.43. Gas to Ely would cost maybe $60 round trip. Food for 2 days, another $30 if she was careful. The risk was losing money they desperately needed. The risk of not going was losing the only chance she'd had in years. She looked at Mia, at her daughter's face still round with childhood, at eyes that hadn't yet learned to stop trusting that adults could fix things. Yes, baby, we can go see it. The decision made, Rachel called the attorney's office, left a voicemail stating her intention to visit the property and discuss claiming it. Then she called the diner and quit before her boss could fire her. At least that way she controlled the narrative. They packed the car in darkness on December 19th, loading everything they owned into a 2008 Honda Accord with 187,000 miles and check engine light that had been on so long Rachel had stopped noticing it. Clothes, kitchen supplies, Mia's stuffed animals, the few books they kept. Everything else had been sold or donated over the past 6 months as rent became impossible and survival became art. Mia climbed into the back seat, wrapped in every jacket they owned. Are we going on an adventure? The biggest one yet. They left Minneapolis at dawn, driving north on Highway 169 as the city gave way to suburbs, then small towns, then forest and frozen lakes stretching white and empty toward horizons that looked like promises or threats, depending on how you squinted. Rachel kept the radio off to save battery, drove exactly the speed limit to avoid costly tickets, rationed the heat to preserve gas. Mia sang to herself in the back, making up songs about ice palaces and princesses, narrating their journey with the unself-conscious creativity of childhood. The GPS announced their arrival in Ely 5 hours later. Rachel drove slowly through the main street, taking in a town that looked like it had peaked somewhere in the 1970s and settled into comfortable decline. Gift shops catering to summer tourists, a grocery store, 2 bars, a hardware store, the attorney's office. She parked outside Nordstrom and Associates, a small brick building with frost-covered windows. Inside, warmth hit her face like blessing. A receptionist, elderly woman with kind eyes, looked up from her desk. Help you. I'm Rachel Kovacs. I called about the Lindstrom estate. Recognition flickered across the woman's face, followed by something that might have been pity. Mr. Nordstrom's expecting you. Just a moment. Harold Nordstrom emerged from a back office, 60s, gray hair, wearing a suit that had been expensive once, but now showed its age in shiny elbows and loose threads. He shook Rachel's hand with firm grip. Ms. Kovacs, thank you for coming so quickly. I didn't have much choice. His expression suggested he understood more than she'd said. Please sit. Let's discuss the property. In his office, surrounded by filing cabinets and law books that smelled of old paper, Nordstrom laid out the reality. Magnus Lindstrom had been Rachel's great-uncle, her grandmother Astrid's younger brother. They'd immigrated from Sweden in 1952, settling in Ely, where Magnus built a business selling ice to fishing camps and resorts. The building you've inherited was his ice house, where he stored and processed ice cut from local lakes. The business was successful until the 1990s when commercial refrigeration made it obsolete. Magnus tried converting it to other uses, storage facility, event space, but nothing worked. He died alone, no spouse, no children, leaving everything to his closest blood relative. That's you. Why didn't anyone tell me he existed? Nordstrom's face clouded. There was a falling out in your grandmother's generation. Magnus and Astrid stopped speaking in 1975 over something neither would discuss. Your grandmother passed in 2003, correct? Yes. Magnus tried to contact her several times before she died. She never responded. After her death, he apparently decided to leave his property to her descendants as a way of reconciling what couldn't be fixed while living. Rachel felt the weight of family grudges, of inherited silence, of the way pain echoed across generations until nobody remembered what started it. What's the property worth? Nordstrom pulled out an assessment. Difficult to say. The building is 12,000 square feet, sits on 2 acres at the edge of town. Structurally sound according to the last inspection in 2008, but it's been vacant since 2009. No heat, no maintenance, likely significant damage from freeze-thaw cycles. Comparable properties in Ely have sold for $50,000 to $80,000, but that's with upkeep. This one, shrugged. The back taxes are $14,750. If you can't pay that, the county will auction it. You might get a buyer at $20,000 if you're lucky. $20,000 minus $14,000 in taxes left $6,000. Barely enough to cover first month's rent and deposit somewhere. Not enough to change anything fundamental. Can I see it? Of course. Nordstrom pulled keys from a drawer. I'll drive you. The Ice Palace sat at the end of a gravel road 3 miles from downtown, surrounded by empty lots and evergreen forest. Rachel's first thought was that palace was generous. The building was utilitarian, all function and no beauty. Concrete block walls painted white decades ago, now stained and peeling. Flat roof showing patches and repairs. Small windows set high, designed for insulation rather than light. But it was large, imposing in its bulk, occupying space with the authority of something built to last. Nordstrom unlocked the main door, heavy steel that groaned on hinges. Inside was darkness and cold, temperature barely different from outside. He flipped a switch. Nothing happened. Electricity's been cut for years. I brought flashlights. The beam revealed a space that had once been industrial, purposeful. The main floor was open, concrete throughout, with metal tracks embedded in the floor where ice blocks had been moved on wheeled carts. Against one wall stood ancient machinery. Ice saws, shavers, storage equipment, all frozen in time and probably frozen literally during winter months. Stairs led down to a basement level. Nordstrom descended carefully, testing each step. Rachel followed with Mia pressed against her back. The basement was smaller, maybe 8,000 square feet, divided into rooms. Nordstrom's flashlight revealed thick insulated doors, walls designed for extreme cold storage, floor drains for meltwater. This is where Magnus stored the ice before delivery. Kept it below, freezing even in summer, before electric refrigeration was common. The insulation is remarkable. 18-inch walls filled with sawdust and cork. Probably still maintains temperature differential even without active cooling. One room at the far end had a door different from the others, solid steel, industrial grade, with a complex locking mechanism. Nordstrom tried the keys on his ring. None fit. Magnus never mentioned this room specifically. Might have been his office or record storage. Rachel ran her hand along the door, felt metal so cold it burned. Can we get it open? We need a locksmith or a cutting torch. Not today, certainly. Miss Kovacs, I need to be direct with you. This property is interesting historically, but practically it's a burden. The taxes are real. The building needs significant work to be usable for anything. I understand you're in difficult circumstances, but taking this on might make things worse rather than better. Rachel looked around the basement, at the darkness barely pushed back by flashlight beams, at the concrete and steel and cold that had preserved Magnus Lindstrom's failure for 15 years. Then she thought about the eviction notice, about Minneapolis shelters, about Mia's face when she had to explain they had nowhere to sleep. How long do I have to decide? 60 days from November 28th. That gives you until late January. And if I want to claim it, what's required? Pay the back taxes in full. Sign the transfer papers. Take possession. $14,750. Rachel had $287 in checking, maybe another $50 in change scattered through the car. She needed a miracle or a crime to raise that much by late January. But miracles and crimes both required hope, and hope was the only thing she had left. I'll figure it out. They returned to town as darkness fell, the temperature dropping from brutal to deadly. Nordstrom offered contact information for local contractors if she wanted estimates on repairs, wished her luck with financing, looked at her with the particular sadness of someone who'd seen poverty make people desperate. Rachel drove back through Ely looking for the cheapest place to sleep. The motel on Main Street wanted $75 per night. The lodge on the lake wanted $120. She kept driving until she found herself back at the Ice Palace, sitting in the car with the engine running for heat, making calculations. Mia was asleep in the back, exhausted from the journey. Rachel counted their money again. $287 minus $60 for gas meant $227 remaining. A motel for even one night would cut that to $152. Food for 2 more days would drop it to maybe $120. Or she could spend $0 on lodging and keep every penny for food and gas and the impossible dream of somehow raising $14,000. The decision made itself. Rachel turned off the engine, pulled every blanket they owned into the front seat, and climbed into the back with Mia. They curled together for warmth, Rachel's body wrapped around her daughter's, sharing heat, sharing breath, sharing the particular intimacy of poverty that makes survival a team sport. Mia stirred, mumbled something about princesses. Rachel kissed her forehead, tasted salt from dried tears she didn't remember crying. Sleep, baby. Tomorrow we'll explore the palace. Outside, the temperature dropped to 20 below zero. Inside the car, frost formed on windows. Rachel lay awake, counting her daughter's heartbeats, measuring time in the rhythm of breathing, waiting for dawn or hypothermia, whichever came first. Morning arrived gray and merciless. Rachel woke with Mia's weight against her chest, both of them stiff from cold and cramped positions. Frost had formed on the inside of the car windows, turning the world outside into abstract shapes and threatening whiteness. She started the engine. It caught on the third try, coughing black smoke, and ran the heat while they ate breakfast, granola bars and water bottles that had started to freeze during the night. Mia was quiet, subdued in the way children get when they sense their parents are scared but don't have language for why. Mama, why do we sleep in the car? To save money for fixing the palace. Is that our house now? Rachel looked at the building through frost-scribbled windows. In daylight, it looked worse. Stains more visible, damage more apparent, the whole structure screaming abandonment and failure. Maybe, if we can make it work. They used the gas station bathroom in town to wash faces and brush teeth. Rachel buying nothing, just using facilities with the invisible guilt of someone taking resources they haven't paid for. The attendant, Young guy, bored, didn't seem to notice or care. Back at the Ice Palace, Rachel approached with new purpose. Yesterday had been about seeing. Today was about understanding. She walked the perimeter, noting broken windows on the east side, damaged siding where ice had built up and torn away sections, the roof that sagged slightly in one corner. But she also saw potential. The foundation was solid concrete, no cracks visible. The walls were thick, built for Minnesota winters. The structure was sound, even if the cosmetics were shot. Inside, using her phone's flashlight to conserve Nordstrom's batteries, she explored more carefully. The main floor could be divided into living spaces with some framing and drywall. The basement rooms, once cleaned, could be bedrooms, unusual but functional. The locked room at the basement's far end kept drawing her attention. Rachel examined the door again in better light, noticed details she'd missed yesterday. The lock was modern, installed recently based on the new screws and unstained metal. Someone had secured this room after Magnus died, or shortly before. She tried every key on Nordstrom's ring again, then keys she'd found scattered in drawers upstairs. Nothing worked. The door remained sealed, holding secrets that felt increasingly important. Mia called from upstairs. "Mama, I found something." Rachel climbed back to the main floor, where Mia stood beside a filing cabinet, one drawer hanging open. Inside were folders, dozens of them, labeled in shaking handwriting. Rachel pulled them out, spread them on the floor. Property taxes, business licenses, inspection reports. But also personal correspondence, letters addressed to my brother Magnus, in handwriting Rachel recognized from old photos, her grandmother Astrid's distinctive cursive. The letters dated from 1952 to 1975, chronicling immigration, business struggles, family news. Then they stopped abruptly in April 1975 with a letter from Astrid that made Rachel's breath catch. "Magnus, what you're asking is impossible. I won't keep these secrets. I won't lie to protect people who don't deserve protection. If you continue down this path, we can no longer be family. Choose carefully." No explanation of what Magnus had asked, what secrets existed, who needed protection. Just the end of relationship, crystallized in ink that had faded to brown but hadn't lost its sharpness. Rachel kept searching, finding Magnus' business records, his attempts to save the ice business through the 1990s, his slow decline into isolation. But nothing explained the mysterious room, the modern lock, the sense that something important was hidden here. Then, at the bottom of the last drawer, she found an envelope addressed to my heir, if you're reading this. The paper was new, the handwriting the same shaking script from the tax documents. Magnus' final correspondence, written recently despite his death weeks ago. Rachel opened it carefully, pulled out 2 pages. "To whoever inherits this building. If you've made it this far, you've chosen to claim what I left despite its obvious burdens." That suggests either desperation or curiosity. Probably both. Either way, you deserve to know what you've actually inherited. This building isn't just an ice house. It's a vault. In 1952, when I came to America, I brought with me something my father gave me before he died in Sweden. Something worth more than money, more than property, more than any inheritance you might have expected. I've spent 70 years protecting it, hiding it, waiting for the right person to pass it to. I couldn't give it to my sister Astrid. She would have reported what I'd hidden to authorities, believing honesty mattered more than family legacy. I respected her principles even as I couldn't share them. So I waited. And now it's yours, whoever you are. My great-niece Rachel, most likely, if the genealogist I hired was correct. I'm sorry we never met. I'm sorry your grandmother and I wasted decades in silence over principles neither of us would abandon. What I've hidden is in the locked room in the basement. The key isn't in this building. I gave it to someone I trust, someone who will only give it to you if you prove you're serious about staying, about protecting what's here. That person is Marcus Webb. He runs Webb's Hardware on Main Street. Tell him you're Magnus' heir. Tell him you've read this letter. He'll know what to do. But Rachel, be warned. What's in that room will change your life. It could save you or destroy you, depending on how you handle it. There are people who've been searching for this for decades, who would hurt you to get it. Choose carefully how you proceed. Your great-uncle, Magnus Lindstrom. The letter ended with a phone number and an address. Webb's Hardware, 247 Main Street, Ely. Rachel read it 3 times, heart pounding. A vault. Something worth hiding for 70 years. People searching for it. Danger wrapped in inheritance. Every instinct screamed trap, scam, delusion. But desperation made her willing to believe in impossible things, and she'd already driven 5 hours to claim an ice house. What was one more unlikely story? Mia, tug her sleeve. What does it say? Great Uncle Magnus left us a treasure hunt. Like in stories? Exactly like in stories. Webb's Hardware occupied a storefront that looked unchanged since 1960. Wooden floors worn smooth by generations of boots, shelves stacked with tools and supplies, the smell of oil and sawdust and metal. A bell chimed when Rachel pushed through the door, Mia's hand tight in hers. The man behind the counter was perhaps 70, weathered face, steady hands, sorting nails into bins. He looked up with the neutral expression of a shopkeeper greeting potential customers. Help you find something? Are you Marcus Webb? Depends who's asking. Rachel pulled out Magnus' letter, held it up so he could see the handwriting. I'm Rachel Kovacs, Magnus Lindstrom's great niece. I inherited the Ice Palace. Marcus's expression shifted, surprise, then something sharper, more cautious. You've read his letter. Yes. And you're here to claim what's hidden. I'm here to understand what I've inherited. Marcus set down the nails carefully, studied her face like he was reading text written in wrinkles and exhaustion. Then he glanced at Mia, at her thin coat and worn shoes, at the particular look of childhood shaped by scarcity. Come to the back. We need privacy for this conversation. His office was small, cluttered with decades of paperwork and hardware catalogs. He closed the door, gestured for them to sit, then pulled a small wooden box from a locked drawer. Magnus gave me this 10 years ago. Made me promise to give it only to his heir, and only if they came in person to claim it. You got identification. Rachel showed her driver's license. Marcus examined it, compared the name and photo, then nodded slowly. All right, you're who you say you are. But before I give you this, you need to understand what you're getting into. Magnus Lindstrom was my friend for 40 years. He was also a man carrying secrets that cost him everything. His relationship with his sister, his chance at family, his peace of mind. Those secrets are about to become yours. You sure you want that? Do I have a choice? Everyone has choices. Sometimes they're all bad, but they're still choices. Rachel thought about the eviction notice, about $227 in her pocket, about sleeping in her car with a 6-year-old daughter. What's in the box? Marcus opened it, revealing a single old-fashioned key, heavy brass, ornate in a way that suggested age and importance. Beside it lay another letter, this one sealed with wax. This key opens the locked room in the basement. The letter explains what you'll find there. Magnus' instructions were clear. Read the letter first, then decide whether to open the room. Once you see what's inside, there's no unknowing it. No going back. He slid both items across the desk. Rachel picked up the letter, felt the weight of paper and wax, and 70 years of hidden truth. Mia whispered, "Is that the treasure?" "Part of it, baby." Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. "Ms. Kovacs, Magnus told me about your situation, or the situation he thought you'd be in when you receive his inheritance. He said you'd likely be desperate, scared, looking for salvation. He wanted me to tell you that what's in that room isn't salvation. It's responsibility. It might solve your immediate problems, but it'll create others. Bigger ones. How did he know I'd be desperate? He tracked your grandmother's descendants through public records. He knew about your divorce, your job losses, your struggles. He wasn't stalking you. He was trying to understand who would inherit his burden. He chose you not because you were successful, but because you'd survived. Survival mattered more to him than success." The words landed heavy. Some dead stranger had been watching her life, documenting her failures, deciding she was worthy of inheritance because she'd endured poverty. It felt invasive and oddly touching simultaneously. What happens if I don't open the room? Then the building gets auctioned for taxes. What's inside stays hidden until someone else finds it eventually. Magnus will have protected his secret for 70 years only to have it discovered by whoever buys the building for $20,000. And if I do open it, Marcus met her eyes directly. Then you inherit not just a building, but a choice Magnus made in 1952 that changed his entire life. You inherit the consequences of that choice. You inherit the danger. Rachel looked at the key, at the sealed letter, at Mia coloring on scrap paper in the corner, oblivious to adult decisions that would shape her childhood. She thought about principles and pragmatism, about her grandmother refusing to keep Magnus' secrets, about whether honesty was worth homelessness. Then she picked up the key. "Thank you, Mr. Webb. I'll read the letter at the Ice Palace." He nodded slowly, respect in his expression. "Magnus said you'd make that choice. Said anyone desperate enough to sleep in their car outside an abandoned ice house was desperate enough to risk what came next. He was right about most things. Hope he's right about you." Back at the Ice Palace, Rachel parked where they'd slept the night before, engine running for heat, while she opened Magnus' final letter with fingers that had started to shake. The seal broke with a soft crack. Inside, 3 pages of cramped handwriting. "Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, you've met Marcus and accepted the key. That means you're committed to understanding what I've hidden, what I've protected, what will now become your responsibility. In 1952, I left Sweden under circumstances I couldn't explain to immigration officials or to my sister. My father, Per Lindström, had worked as a security guard at the Stockholm Diamond Exchange for 30 years. In his final months, he became aware of a theft, a systematic scheme by the exchange's director to steal diamonds from inventory, replacing them with high-quality forgeries that wouldn't be detected for years. My father documented everything. He had proof that would have sent powerful people to prison and destroyed their families. But he was dying of cancer, too weak to fight. He gave the evidence to me and made me promise to get out of Sweden, to keep it safe until the people involved were dead and justice could be served without destroying innocent lives. I kept that promise. I brought the evidence to America, hid it, and waited. I waited through the deaths of everyone involved in the theft. I waited through decades of guilt over protecting criminals. I waited until there was no one left to punish except ghosts. But Rachel, what I hid wasn't just evidence. It was also the stolen diamonds themselves. My father intercepted one shipment before it could be replaced with forgeries. Approximately 8,000 carats of investment-grade diamonds, worth in 1952 about $200,000. Today, those same diamonds are worth approximately $310 million. They're in the locked room. All of them, plus the complete documentation of the theft, the names of everyone involved, the proof that would have destroyed them in 1952, but now only serves as history. I never sold a single diamond, never used them, never even looked at them except to verify they remained hidden. I protected them because my father asked me to, because breaking that promise felt like betraying the only person who ever believed in me. But I'm dead now. The promise is fulfilled. The thieves are dead. Their children are dead. There's no one left to prosecute. No justice to serve except the justice of finally letting go. The diamonds are yours. Use them wisely. Use them to build the life my father's choice prevented me from building. Use them to give your daughter what my secrets prevented Astrid's family from receiving. But Rachel, be careful. When diamonds worth $310 million surface after 70 years, people notice. Legitimate dealers, criminals, treasure hunters, governments, they'll all want to know where these came from, how you got them, whether they're stolen. They are, technically, despite the passage of time. You'll need experts to authenticate them, lawyers to establish ownership, security to protect them. You'll need to be smarter, more careful, more strategic than you've ever been in your life. Or you could ignore them, leave them locked in that room, sell the building without opening the vault. Let someone else discover them and deal with the complications. The choice is yours. That's what inheritance means, not just receiving, but choosing what to do with what's been given. Whatever you decide, know that I'm sorry. Sorry I couldn't meet you. Sorry my choices cost your family decades of connection. Sorry that my final gift to you is wrapped in danger and difficulty. But I'm also hopeful. My father believed protecting his family's integrity mattered more than money. I spent 70 years honoring that belief. Maybe you'll use what he protected to create the life he would have wanted for his descendants. One built on choice rather than circumstance, on security rather than survival. Good luck, Rachel Kovacs. You're going to need it. Your great-uncle, Magnus Lindstrom. The letter ended with the date, November 25th, 2024, 3 days before Magnus died. Rachel sat in the car, engines still running, letter trembling in her hands while her mind tried to process the impossible mathematics. $310 million. In diamonds. Hidden in a basement room in an abandoned ice house in northern Minnesota. Left to her by a great-uncle she'd never met who'd spent 70 years protecting a secret that had destroyed his family relationships and left him dying alone. It was absurd. It was unbelievable. It was exactly the kind of story desperate people told themselves to survive one more day. But she had the key. She had the building. She had the letter written in shaking handwriting by a dead man who had no reason to lie. Mia's voice from the back seat. "Mama, are you crying?" Rachel hadn't realized she was. She wiped her face quickly, forced herself to breathe. "Happy tears, baby. I think Great-Uncle Magnus left us something that will change everything. Better than a treasure? Maybe the actual treasure." She turned off the engine. Conserve gas, conserve money, conserve everything until she knew what was real, and climbed out in a cold that bit through her coat. The ice palace waited, patient as it had been for 15 years, keeping secrets that were about to become truths. The key fit the lock perfectly. Rachel stood in the basement with her phone's flashlight. Mia pressed against her leg, hands steady despite the fear singing through her veins. The mechanism was smooth, well-maintained. Marcus must have been oiling it regularly, preserving function for this exact moment. The lock clicked open with sound that seemed too loud in the underground silence. Rachel pulled the heavy door toward her, hinges groaning after years without use. Inside was darkness deeper than the basement, cold that made the ambient temperature feel warm by comparison. She stepped through the threshold, flashlight beam cutting through black. The room was perhaps 12 feet square, walls lined with the same thick insulation as the rest of the basement. But where other rooms had held ice storage equipment, this one contained only two things. A wooden desk, simple but solid, standing against the far wall. And on that desk, a safe. Industrial grade, combination lock, size of a small refrigerator, squatting like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Rachel approached slowly, Mia silent now, sensing the weight of moment. The safe surface was covered in frost. The room's temperature was well below freezing even without active cooling, protected by insulation that had preserved Arctic conditions for decades. Magnus' letter had mentioned a combination. She pulled it out again, scanned to the final paragraph she'd skipped in her initial reading. The safe combination is your grandmother Astrid's birthday. R19, L34, R52. She never knew what I protected, but her integrity guided every choice I made. It seemed right that her birthday should unlock what her principles kept hidden. Rachel's hand shook as she turned the dial. Right to 19, left to 34, right to 52. The mechanism was stiff from cold, resistant, but it moved. Something inside shifted with mechanical precision. She pulled the handle. The safe door swung open, releasing air that had been sealed since at least 2009, maybe earlier. The smell of old paper and metal and time compressed emerged like breath from somewhere ancient. Inside, the diamonds waited. They were stored in small cloth bags, dozens of them, arranged in precise rows like soldiers at attention. Each bag was labeled with weight and grade in Magnus' careful handwriting. Rachel picked up the nearest one, felt weight that seemed impossible for something so small. She opened it. The diamonds spilled into her palm, white, brilliant, catching her phone's light and multiplying it into rainbow fragments that danced across frost-covered walls like captured stars. Mia gasped. "Mama, they're so pretty." Pretty didn't begin to cover it. They were beautiful in the particular way valuable things are, not just aesthetically pleasing, but radiating the power of concentrated worth, the knowledge that these small stones could buy security, shelter, futures. Rachel counted the bags, 84 total. She checked Magnus' inventory list taped inside the safe door. 8,047 carats, investment grade, authenticated by Stockholm Diamond Exchange in 1951. The documentation was there too. Folders containing original certificates, evidence of the theft, names of thieves who'd been dead for decades, proof that would have meant justice 70 years ago, but now served only as historical record. And at the bottom of the safe, one more letter. Not from Magnus. The handwriting was different, older, forming Swedish words Rachel couldn't read. But Magnus had paper-clipped a translation. To my son Magnus, these diamonds represent stolen beauty, corrupted value. I took them to prevent greater evil, but taking them made me complicit in what I opposed. I pass this burden to you not as treasure, but as responsibility. Use them to build something honest. Use them to create what the thieves destroyed. Use them to prove that wealth can serve justice instead of undermining it. I'm sorry to leave you this choice, but I trust you more than I trust institutions that failed to stop the theft they were designed to prevent. Your father, Per Lindstrom. The weight of 3 generations settled onto Rachel's shoulders. Per Lindstrom stealing diamonds to prevent greater theft. Magnus hiding them to honor his father's request. Now Rachel, discovering them at the exact moment of maximum desperation. It felt like fate or curse, depending on your relationship with Providence. Mia tugged her coat. Mama, can we keep them? The question every child asks about beautiful things they find, innocent in its assumption that possession follows discovery. But Rachel knew better. Knew that diamonds worth $310 million came with complications that $227 in checking accounts couldn't navigate. She needed time, needed to think, needed to understand the exact shape of the choice Magnus had described. Use the diamonds or ignore them, claim the treasure or walk away, risk everything or risk nothing. But first, she needed to document what she'd found. Needed photographs, inventory, verification that this was real before it started feeling like desperation-induced hallucination. Rachel pulled out her phone, photographed the safe's contents from multiple angles. The diamonds, the documentation, Magnus' letters, the inventory. Evidence that whatever came next, this moment had actually happened. Then she carefully returned the diamonds to the safe, secured the lock, closed the vault door. Some decisions required distance, required seeing with clear eyes unclouded by the immediate shock of discovery. She and Mia climbed back to the main floor, emerging from the basement into cold that felt warm by comparison. Outside, afternoon light was fading toward the early darkness of December in northern Minnesota. They'd been inside perhaps 90 minutes, but it felt like crossing into different country. Rachel sat on the concrete floor, Mia in her lap, and made a list on the back of Magnus' letter. Verify diamonds are real. Establish legal ownership. Find secure storage. Authenticate documentation. Determine market value. Create plan for selling, if selling. Protect Mia through all of above. The list looked simple. The reality would be anything but. Her phone rang. Minneapolis number she didn't recognize. Rachel almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Ms. Kovacs? This is David Shun from Northern Property Management. I'm calling about the unit you're being evicted from. We have a potential tenant wanting to move in early. If you're already out, we could waive the balance you owe and avoid legal proceedings. The balance she owed was 4 months back rent, $4,800. Having it waived would save her from collections, judgments, credit destruction. But it meant confirming she'd surrendered, acknowledging defeat. Rachel looked around the ice palace, at concrete and cold and the weight of $310 million locked in a basement vault. I'm out. The apartment is yours. Excellent. We'll process the paperwork. He hung up. Rachel sat in silence, feeling the bridge burn behind her. No apartment in Minneapolis. No job. No plan except a building she technically didn't own and diamonds she technically couldn't prove existed. But she had the key. She had Magnus' letters. She had the impossible choice between safety and survival that poverty makes into the only choice. Mia stirred against her chest. Mama, I'm hungry. Reality reasserted itself. Rachel counted remaining money. $227 minus gas, To get here meant roughly $165 left. Food for tonight. Food for tomorrow. Maybe one more day after that, before choices became crises. She drove into town, bought bread, peanut butter, milk, granola bars, enough for 3 days if they were careful. The grocery clerk was friendly, chatty, mentioned the weather and Christmas, and how nice it was to see new faces in Ely during slow season. Rachel smiled, made appropriate responses, paid with cash, she counted twice, drove back to the Ice Palace before dark. They ate dinner sitting on the car's hood, the engine warm beneath them, watching stars emerge in skies so clear they looked painted. Mia pointed out constellations she'd learned in school, making up names for patterns that existed only in her imagination. That's the Diamond Princess. She lives in an ice palace and helps people who are lost. What kind of help? Magic help. Like, she makes their wishes come true, but only good wishes. Bad wishes bounce off her crown. Rachel pulled her daughter closer. That's a nice story, baby. It's not a story. It's us. Later, after Mia fell asleep in the back seat, surrounded by every blanket they owned, Rachel sat in the driver's seat staring at the ice palace's dark shape against darker sky. Magnus had called the diamonds her inheritance, but he'd also called them a burden, responsibility, danger, all of which were true. But what he hadn't acknowledged was that burden could also mean salvation when you were drowning. Tomorrow she'd start the real work, verification, legal consultation, planning. But tonight, she just let herself feel what it meant to potentially have $310 million while sleeping in a car because she couldn't afford a motel room. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the fear. But underneath both lay something else, something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Morning arrived with frost so thick on the car windows that Rachel couldn't see outside until she'd run the engine for 20 minutes, burning gas they couldn't afford to waste. Mia woke slowly, face creased from sleeping against the seatbelt, asking in a small voice if they could please find a bathroom soon. They drove to the gas station, used the facilities again with Rachel's mounting guilt about taking without buying, then sat in the parking lot eating peanut butter sandwiches while Rachel made decisions about the day ahead. First priority, verify the diamonds were real. She couldn't plan anything until she knew whether she discovered treasure or elaborate delusion. But gemological authentication required experts, required trust, required revealing what she'd found to strangers who might decide it belonged to them more than it belonged to her. Rachel pulled out her phone, searched Diamond Authentication Minnesota, found results mostly in Minneapolis and Duluth. The closest certified gemologist was 3 hours south in Duluth, Dr. Sarah Chun, GI certified, specializing in estate jewelry and vintage stones. The website looked legitimate, professional. Reviews praised her discretion, expertise, fair pricing. Rachel called before she could second-guess the decision. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered, voice warm but efficient. Chun Gemological Services. Dr. Chun? My name is Rachel Kovacs. I have some diamonds I need authenticated. Family heirlooms. I need someone discreet. A pause. How many stones are we discussing? Rachel's mouth went dry. Approximately 8,000 carats. The silence stretched long enough that Rachel thought the call had dropped. Then Dr. Chin's voice returned, sharper now, interested. 8,000 carats. You understand that's an unusual quantity for family heirlooms. It's an unusual family. I'll need to see them in person. Bring them to my office in Duluth. I have an opening this afternoon at 2. I can't bring them. They are secured. Could you come to Ely? Another pause. Ms. Kovacs, I don't typically make house calls for authentication services. My equipment is here. I'll pay double your usual rate. Rachel had no idea how she'd pay anything, but desperation made her reckless with promises. Triple, and I'll come tomorrow morning. But Ms. Kovacs, if this is some kind of scam or waste of my time, I'll bill you for the trip regardless. Are we clear? Completely clear. These diamonds are real. I just need you to confirm it. They agreed on 10 a.m. the following day. Rachel gave the Ice Palace's address, hung up, and immediately wondered if she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. She'd invited a stranger to examine diamonds worth more than some country's GDP. What stopped Dr. Chun from bringing armed accomplices, taking the stones, disappearing? Nothing. Absolutely nothing except faith in human decency, which felt increasingly like currency she couldn't afford. But the alternative was worse, spending the rest of her life wondering if the diamonds were real while sleeping in her car and watching Mia's childhood collapse under the weight of poverty. Some risks were worth taking when the alternative was slow-motion disaster. Rachel drove back to the Ice Palace, parked, and sat trying to think through what came next. She needed legal advice about ownership, needed to understand whether Magnus' bequest was legitimate or whether some obscure Swedish law made the diamonds still stolen property 70 years later. She needed security. The Ice Palace had no locks that couldn't be bypassed by determined thieves, no alarm system, no protection except isolation. She needed money to pay for all of this, needed to somehow bridge the gap between having nothing and having everything until she could safely liquidate enough diamonds to function. The phone rang again. Unknown number, local area code. Ms. Kovacs? This is Brenda Halverson with the Ely Echo. I'm a reporter covering local news. I heard you inherited the old Ice Palace from Magnus Lindstrom. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Rachel's first instinct was to refuse, to protect privacy, to avoid publicity. But then she thought about how small towns worked, how refusing to talk to the local paper would make her seem suspicious, secretive, worthy of deeper investigation. Sure. What would you like to know? Well, Magnus was quite a character around here. Kept to himself the last few years, but folks remember his ice business from back in the day. What are your plans for the property? Good question. What were her plans? I'm still assessing the condition of the building. It needs significant work. Are you planning to reopen the ice business? Brenda's tone suggested this was meant as gentle humor. No, nothing like that. Maybe residential conversion or storage. I'm exploring options. And your Magnus' great-niece? I didn't know he had family. We've been out of touch. Family disagreement from before I was born. Magnus left me the building as a way of reconciling, I think. That's lovely. Very Minnesota. Making things right even after death. How long are you planning to stay in Ely? The question felt loaded. Rachel chose words carefully. As long as it takes to decide what to do with the property. They talked for another 10 minutes. Brenda asking questions that felt innocent but probably weren't. Where Rachel was staying, how she'd heard about the inheritance, whether she'd found anything interesting in the building. Rachel deflected most of it, gave vague answers, ended the call feeling like she'd been interviewed by someone much smarter than the folksy tone suggested. 2 hours later, Marcus Webb appeared at the Ice Palace, driving an old pickup truck with hardware store logos on the doors. He climbed out carefully, moving with the deliberate caution of age, carrying a toolbox and looking concerned. Heard you talk to Brenda Halverson. News travels fast. This is Ely. Population 3,400. A stranger inheriting Magnus Lindstrom's place? That's front-page material. He set down the toolbox. Did you open a room? Yes. And everything Magnus described was there. Marcus nodded slowly, unsurprised. Figured as much. He wouldn't have set this whole thing up if the treasure was metaphorical. Now you need to understand something. In a town this size, people notice changes. You've been here 2 days, you're living out of your car, and you're asking questions about diamond authentication. That's going to generate talk. Rachel felt her stomach drop. How do you know about the authentication? Dr. Chin called me. We're old friends. Her grandfather and I were in Rotary together for 20 years. She wanted to know if you were legitimate or running some kind of scam. I vouched for you. Told her Magnus left you something valuable and you were being appropriately cautious. But Rachel, that means at least 2 people in Duluth now know you have diamonds. Maybe more if Dr. Chin mentioned it to anyone. She's supposed to be discreet. She is. But discretion isn't the same as silence. And in my experience, when valuable things surface, word spreads no matter how careful people are. Marcus opened his toolbox, pulled out new deadbolts, security hasps, heavy-duty locks. I brought these. We're going to secure this building properly before anyone decides to test how serious you are about protecting what's inside. They spent the afternoon installing locks. Marcus worked with practiced efficiency despite his age, showing Rachel how to reinforce door frames, where to place security bars, how to create barriers that would slow down thieves even if they couldn't stop determined professionals. Mia helped by holding tools, fetching supplies, asking endless questions about how locks worked and why bad people wanted to steal things and whether they could get a dog to guard the palace. Marcus answered each question patiently, treating her contributions seriously in a way that made the child glow with importance. By evening, the ice palace was more secure than it had been in 15 years. Not impregnable, but defensible. Marcus stepped back, examining his work with critical eye. That'll do for now. But Rachel, you need to think long-term. If those diamonds are worth what Magnus claimed, you can't protect them yourself. You'll need professional security, proper insurance, legal documentation, establishing ownership. That takes money you don't have yet, and expertise you can't fake. I know. Do you? Because I've seen people come into unexpected wealth. Most of them make terrible decisions in the first few weeks. They trust the wrong people, spend foolishly, assume money solves problems it actually creates. You seem smart, but desperation makes everyone stupid eventually. Rachel bristled at the implication, but recognized truth in it. She was desperate. She was terrified. She was absolutely capable of making catastrophic mistakes if she didn't slow down and think carefully. What would you do if you were me? Marcus considered, choosing words with visible care. I'd verify the diamonds are real. Once I knew that, I'd find a lawyer who specializes in inherited property and international provenance. I'd establish legal ownership before trying to sell a single stone. I'd move slowly, carefully, resisting every impulse to rush into decisions that couldn't be undone. And I'd keep my daughter far away from here until the dangerous part was finished. I can't send Mia anywhere. I have no one to send her to. Then you protect her by being smarter than everyone who will try to take advantage of you. Starting with being honest about your situation. You're broke, homeless, and sitting on a fortune you can't access. That's vulnerability criminals can smell from 100 miles away. The words stung because they were accurate. Rachel had approximately $140 left in cash, nowhere to sleep except her car, and no immediate way to convert diamonds into currency without taking risks she didn't understand. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket, set on the makeshift table they'd created from sawhorses and plywood. There's $2,000 in there. Magnus left it with me specifically for his heir's immediate needs. He knew whoever inherited would probably be in financial distress. Use it to get a motel room, buy proper food, give yourself breathing space to make good decisions instead of desperate ones. Rachel stared at the envelope like it might explode. I can't take your money. It's not my money. It's yours. Magnus' final gift beyond the building and the diamonds. He wanted you to have a chance to succeed, not just a burden to survive. Marcus pushed the envelope closer. Take it. You'll insult his memory if you refuse help he specifically arranged for you. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands, felt the thickness of bills inside. $2,000. More money than she'd held at once in years. Enough for a motel, food, gas, time to think. Thank you. Thank Magnus. I'm just a messenger. Marcus gathered his tools. The gemologist arrives tomorrow morning. I'll be here when she does, if you want someone who knows the local dynamics. Dr. Chun is trustworthy, but it never hurts to have a witness. I'd appreciate that. He left as darkness fell, taillights disappearing down the gravel road. Rachel stood in the secured ice palace, holding an envelope full of money she hadn't earned, surrounded by diamonds she hadn't discovered yet technically owned, trying to reconcile who she'd been yesterday with who she was becoming. Mia appeared beside her, having explored the now-locked building with the thoroughness of childhood curiosity. Mama, can we sleep inside tonight? It's warmer than the car. Rachel looked around the concrete space. No furniture, no heat, no comfort. But it was shelter, it was theirs, and it was warmer than outside. Yes, baby, we can sleep inside. They dragged blankets and sleeping bags from the car, created a nest in the corner of the main floor where concrete met wall, built a small fire in an old metal barrel Marcus had said was safe for indoor use as long as she kept the door cracked for ventilation. Dinner was more peanut butter sandwiches, but eaten inside their building, in their space, it felt different. Less desperate, more like the beginning of something instead of the end. Mia fell asleep quickly, exhausted from helping Marcus. Rachel lay awake watching shadows dance across walls, listening to winter wind howl outside, thinking about the choice Magnus had described in his letter. Use the diamonds or ignore them. Claim the treasure or walk away. Risk everything or risk nothing. But he'd been wrong about one thing. Ignoring the diamonds wasn't the safe choice anymore. Not now that she'd opened the vault, contacted a gemologist, started the process of verification. She'd already crossed the threshold where walking away was possible. Now the only path was forward, through whatever complications waited on the other side of authentication. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived at exactly 10 a.m., driving a black SUV that looked like it cost more than Rachel's entire life. She was perhaps 50, Chinese-American, dressed in practical winter clothing that suggested someone comfortable in rural Minnesota despite the expensive vehicle. Marcus had arrived 30 minutes earlier, having brought coffee and donuts that Mia devoured while Rachel's stomach was too tight with anxiety to eat. He stood now beside Rachel as Dr. Chen approached, carrying 2 large cases that presumably held authentication equipment. Ms. Kovacs. Dr. Chen's handshake was firm, professional. You have diamonds you need authenticated. Yes. Thank you for coming. Marcus spoke highly of you. That's the only reason I'm here. His reputation means something in this region. She looked around the ice palace with visible skepticism. This is where you're storing diamonds worth potentially millions. It's complicated. It always is with estate jewelry. Let's see what we're working with. Rachel led her to the basement, Marcus following. The locked room at the far end looked exactly as she'd left it yesterday. Steel door, complex lock, the sense of secrets barely contained. She unlocked it with Magnus' key, pushed the door open, led them to the safe. The combination worked smoothly. R19, L34, R52. The door swung wide. Dr. Chun stepped forward, professional interest transforming into something sharper when she saw the cloth bags arranged in precise rows. She pulled on cotton gloves, lifted one bag, opened it carefully. The diamonds spilled into her palm with familiar, light-catching brilliance. She pulled out a loupe, examined several stones with complete focus, moving to better light, checking different angles. The silence stretched. Rachel counted her own heartbeats. Marcus stood solid and steady, a witness to whatever came next. Finally, Dr. Chun looked up, expression carefully neutral. These are real. High quality. Investment grade. Where did you get them? They're part of the estate I inherited. My great-uncle Magnus Lindstrom left them to me. There's documentation. Original certificates from Stockholm Diamond Exchange, 1951. May I see the documentation? Rachel handed over the folders. Dr. Chun read quickly, flipping through pages with increasing focus. When she finished, she set them down carefully and looked at Rachel with new respect and new concern. Ms. Kovacs, what you have here is approximately 8,000 carats of authenticated diamonds from 1951, documented as belonging to Stockholm Diamond Exchange, but clearly removed from their possession 73 years ago. The documentation suggests they were part of an internal theft that was never publicly reported. Is that your understanding? Yes. Then you need to understand several things. First, these diamonds are absolutely real and valuable, conservatively worth $310 million at current market prices. Second, their provenance is complicated. They're stolen property, even if everyone involved in the theft is long dead. Third, attempting to sell them without proper legal establishment of ownership could result in criminal charges, seizure, and years of litigation. Rachel felt her hope curdle into something heavier. So, they're worthless to me? I didn't say that. I said selling them requires careful legal work. But Ms. Kovacs, you also need to understand that word about this discovery will spread. I'm discreet, but I'm legally required to report certain findings to authorities if I believe property may be connected to ongoing criminal activity. These diamonds don't fit that category. The theft occurred before either of us was born, but other gemologists might take different positions. You need a lawyer immediately, someone who specializes in inherited property with international complications. Marcus spoke up. I know someone. Elizabeth Crane in Duluth. She handled a case 5 years ago involving art stolen by Nazis that turned up in an estate sale. Got the heirs clear legal title despite the complicated history. She's expensive, but she's good. How expensive? Rachel's voice came out smaller than intended. $500 an hour. But for a case like this, she might work on contingency. Take a percentage instead of hourly fees. Dr. Chen nodded agreement. Marcus is right. Elizabeth is exactly who you need. I'll provide a full authentication report that she can use in establishing provenance and legal ownership. That'll take me about a week to prepare properly. What do I owe you for today? Rachel thought about the $2,000 in her pocket, wondered how fast it would evaporate. $3,000 for the preliminary authentication and my travel. The full report will be another $5,000. I'll bill you once ownership is established and you can actually pay. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Marcus told me you're in difficult circumstances. I'm willing to extend credit for someone he vouches for. Relief and shame mixed in equal parts. Rachel was accumulating debt faster than she could track. $8,000 to Dr. Chen. Eventually tens of thousands to Elizabeth Crane, the $14,750 in back taxes, whatever other costs emerged. But she was also sitting on $310 million in authenticated diamonds. The debt was manageable. The poverty was solvable. She just had to survive long enough to navigate the legal complexities. Thank you. I'll get you paid as soon as ownership is established. Dr. Chun spent another hour examining diamonds, taking photographs, documenting the safe's contents with meticulous care. When she finally packed up her equipment, she paused at the door. Ms. Kovacs, one more thing. Keep this discovery quiet as long as possible. Once word spreads, you'll attract attention you don't want. Treasure hunters, criminals, opportunists. The fewer people who know about this before legal ownership is established, the safer you'll be. How many people know now? You mean Marcus and whoever you've told. Dr. Chen glanced at Mia, who was exploring the basement corners. Does your daughter understand what you found? She knows they're pretty stones, not their value. Keep it that way. Children can't keep secrets, and this secret needs keeping until you have legal protection. After Dr. Chen left, Marcus helped Rachel secure the vault room again, testing locks, verifying everything was as protected as possible without professional security systems they couldn't yet afford. You holding up okay? His concern was genuine, grandfatherly. I found $310 million in diamonds, and I'm still broke. It's surreal. Welcome to inherited wealth. You're asset-rich and cash-poor, which is its own special kind of torture. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling Elizabeth Crane. She needs to hear about this today, not next week. The call took 10 minutes. Marcus explained the situation in broad strokes, mentioned Dr. Chen's involvement, vouched for Rachel's legitimacy. When he hung up, his expression was mixed. She'll see you tomorrow afternoon in Duluth. 2 p.m. She's intrigued. Cases like this don't come along often. She's also concerned because the legal work will be complex and expensive, but she's willing to discuss contingency arrangements. What percentage would she take? Probably 10 to 20% of the total value once sold. So anywhere from $31 million to $62 million. The numbers were too large to process. Rachel's brain stuttered over the idea that a lawyer might earn more from her inheritance than she'd earn in 1,000 lifetimes working at diners and cleaning hotels. But 80% of $310 million was still $248 million. More than enough to change everything. More than enough to justify the cost. Tell her I'll be there. That afternoon, Rachel used some of Magnus' $2,000 to check into the Ely Motel. Basic accommodations, but clean and warm with actual beds and a bathroom with hot water. Mia's delight at having a real shower, real towels, real television was heartbreaking. She'd forgotten what normal felt like. They ate dinner at the local diner, burgers and fries and milkshakes, the first restaurant meal in months. The waitress was friendly, chatty, mentioned she'd heard Rachel inherited the old ice palace. That's quite a project you've taken on. Magnus kept that place locked up tight for years. Folks always wondered what he was hiding in there. Rachel forced a smile. Just an old ice business. Nothing exciting. Still, it's romantic. inheriting property from a mysterious relative. Like something from a movie. The waitress refilled their water glasses. You planning to stay in Ely long-term? I'm not sure yet. Depends on what I can do with the building. Well, if you need anything, you just ask. Small towns take care of their own, and your Magnus family, so that makes you ours. The kindness felt genuine, but Rachel couldn't shake the awareness that kindness could coexist with curiosity, that people who wanted to help might also want to know what she was hiding. Back at the motel, Mia fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's excitement. Rachel lay in the other bed, staring at ceiling tiles, trying to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. Tomorrow, meet with Elizabeth Crane, establish legal representation, begin the process of proving ownership. Next week, Dr. Chin's full authentication report, more documentation, building the case for legal title. Within a month, hopefully, legal ownership established, ability to sell diamonds, access to money that would solve every problem poverty had created. Within a year, new life, security, Mia's childhood restored, the grinding anxiety of survival replaced by the different anxieties of wealth. The plan looked simple on paper. Rachel suspected the reality would be anything but. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you inherited Magnus Place. Interested in buying if you're selling. Name your price. J. Crawford. Rachel stared at the message, unease crawling up her spine. She'd been in Ely 3 days. She'd talked to maybe 20 people total. How did strangers already know enough to make offers? She didn't respond, blocked the number, tried to convince herself it was just small-town gossip, nothing sinister. But sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of locked rooms and stolen diamonds and faceless people who wanted to take them. The drive to Duluth the next morning took 3 hours through landscape that transformed from forest to city with jarring suddenness. Elizabeth Crane's office was downtown, occupying the top floor of a historic building with Lake Superior visible through large windows. The lawyer herself was perhaps 60, white hair cut short, wearing a suit that suggested success and competence in equal measure. She shook Rachel's hand with grip that communicated authority without aggression. Ms. Kovacs, Marcus speaks highly of you. Please sit. Her office was lined with legal books and framed newspaper articles about high-profile cases she'd won. Rachel recognized one headline. Local attorney secures return of Nazi-looted art to Holocaust survivor's family. Elizabeth followed her gaze. That case took 6 years and cost my client nothing because we worked on contingency. They received 60% of the art's value after legal fees. Everyone was satisfied. I mention this because Marcus outlined your situation, and I believe we could arrange something similar. What would the terms be? I take 15% of whatever value we're able to legally establish and monetize. You keep 85%. All costs, authentication, documentation, filing fees, expert witnesses, come out of my portion. You risk nothing except time. I risk my expertise and capital against the possibility we can't establish clear title. Rachel did the math. 85% of $310 million was $263.5 million. Still more money than comprehension allowed. What are the chances we can establish clear title? Elizabeth opened a folder, pulled out notes she'd apparently been making. Based on what Marcus told me and what Dr. Chin shared, I'd say 70%. The diamonds are documented as stolen in 1951, but everyone involved is dead. The Stockholm Diamond Exchange no longer exists. It merged with other institutions in the 1980s. The Swedish government would have to prove ongoing claim to the stones, which is difficult 73 years later. Your great uncle's documentation helps significantly. If we can show he protected them in good faith, believing they were family property rather than stolen goods, we have strong basis for adverse possession. What's the 30% chance of failure? That Swedish authorities decide to prosecute, that international law gets complicated, that we can't prove chain of custody satisfactorily. But Ms. Kovacs, even in worst-case scenario, you'd likely receive significant settlement, maybe 40 to 50% of value, rather than total loss. 40% of $310 million was still $124 million. The floor of her worst case was higher than she could imagine. What I need to do? Sign a retainer agreement. Give me complete access to all documentation, Magnus letters, Dr. Chen's authentication, the original Swedish certificates. Tell me everything about how you discovered the diamonds, when, under what circumstances. I'll need to interview you extensively to build the narrative that supports your claim. They spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Rachel recounting the inheritance notification, the journey to Ely, Magnus letters, the vault discovery. Elizabeth taking notes, asking clarifying questions, building the legal framework. When they finished, Elizabeth leaned back in her chair with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read, part impressed, part concerned. This is one of the most interesting cases I've encountered. It's also potentially dangerous. Ms. Kovacs, you need to understand that diamonds worth $310 million attract attention from people who don't. Respect legal processes. Once word spreads, and it will spread despite our best efforts, you'll need security beyond what you can currently afford. What kind of security? Professional bodyguards, ideally. Secure storage for the diamonds beyond that basement vault. Possibly relocation for you and your daughter until ownership is legally established and the stones are sold or placed in professional custody. Rachel felt the weight of complications multiplying. I can't afford any of that. I know, which is why I'm going to arrange it and bill it against the eventual settlement. But Rachel, I call you Rachel, you need to take this seriously. People have been killed for far less than $310 million. The fact that you're currently broke and living in a motel doesn't protect you. It makes you more vulnerable. The words settled heavy. Rachel thought about Mia back at the Ely Motel with a babysitter Marcus had arranged. Elderly woman named Dorothy, who'd seemed kind and trustworthy. Thought about how easy it would be for someone to grab her daughter, use her as leverage to get the diamonds. What should I do? For now, stay in Ely, but move locations every few nights. Don't establish patterns. Keep the diamonds locked, and don't visit them on any predictable schedule. I'll arrange for a security consultant to contact you, former police detective who specializes in protecting high-value assets. He'll assess your situation and implement interim protections until we can do better. How long until we establish legal ownership? 4 to 6 months if everything goes smoothly. Longer if we hit complications. But Rachel, I could petition the court to grant you limited access to funds during the legal process, essentially a loan against your eventual ownership. That would let you afford proper security, proper housing, proper legal representation beyond what I can provide alone. Hope flickered again. How much could I access? Perhaps $100,000 to $200,000. Enough to survive comfortably and protect yourself. Not enough to disappear or make the court nervous about repayment if ownership isn't established. $200,000. The number that had seemed impossible yesterday now felt modest compared to what she potentially owned. But it was also salvation, enough to protect Mia, enough to breathe, enough to stop making desperate decisions. How quickly can you arrange that? I'll file the petition tomorrow. Hearing within 2 weeks. If the judge agrees, you'd have funds within a month. Rachel signed a retainer agreement, provided everything Elizabeth needed, left the office feeling simultaneously relieved and more frightened than before. She had professional help now. She also had confirmation that the danger was real, that people might hurt her family to get what Magnus had hidden. The drive back to Ely felt longer than the drive down. Rachel kept checking her rearview mirror for cars that might be following, kept imagining scenarios where armed men forced her off the road, demanded the diamonds, hurt Mia when Rachel couldn't give them what they wanted fast enough. By the time she reached the motel, paranoia had settled into her bones. She checked Mia carefully. No signs of distress, no indication anything had gone wrong. Dorothy reported a quiet afternoon of coloring books and television, accepted payment with grandmotherly warmth, left without apparent suspicion. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of having crossed into territory where safety was illusion and danger was everywhere. That night, she moved them to a different motel on the other side of town. Paid cash, used a fake name, parked where the car wasn't visible from the road. Mia asked why they were moving again. Just being careful, baby. Making sure we're safe. Safe from what? From people who might want to take things that belong to us. Mia processed this with 6-year-old logic. Like bullies. Exactly like bullies. They fell asleep with the door barricaded by furniture Rachel had stacked, with Rachel's phone charged and ready to call 911, with the particular anxiety of knowing wealth had made them targets before they could use wealth as protection. The security consultant Elizabeth had mentioned called the next morning. His name was Thomas Rivera, former Minneapolis police detective, now running a private security firm. His voice was calm, professional, direct. "Ms. Kovacs, Elizabeth Crane briefed me on your situation. I need to assess your current security and implement immediate improvements. Where are you staying?" Rachel hesitated, then gave the motel address. "How did you get this number?" Elizabeth provided it. "I understand you're concerned about privacy. That's smart. But I'm trying to help you, not hurt you. I'll be at your location in 4 hours. Don't leave the room until I arrive." He hung up before Rachel could argue. She spent the next 4 hours in mounting anxiety, keeping Mia entertained with coloring books and motel television, watching through windows for anyone suspicious. Thomas Rivera arrived exactly when promised, driving an unmarked sedan, dressed in plain clothes that somehow still communicated law enforcement background. He was perhaps 45, Latino, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd seen violence and wasn't intimidated by it. He surveyed the motel room in 30 seconds, noting the barricaded door, the window sight lines, Rachel's defensive positioning. "You've got good instincts, but instincts won't stop professionals. What will? Better location, better security protocols, and, honestly, getting those diamonds into professional custody as fast as possible. Every day you personally hold them is a day you're target." He spent an hour outlining recommendations. Move to a secure location. He suggested a cabin 40 miles outside Ely that belonged to a colleague, off public records, accessible only by unmarked road. Transfer the diamonds to a secure facility in Duluth until legal ownership was established. Implement communication protocols so Rachel could verify anyone claiming to represent Elizabeth or Dr. Chin. "This will cost money I don't have yet," Rachel said. "Elizabeth authorized me to bill against the eventual settlement. You're covered. But Ms. Kovacs, I need you to understand something. In my 20 years of police work, I saw people killed for $1,000. You're sitting on $310 million. The math isn't complicated. You're in danger until those diamonds are either legally yours and sold, or seized by authorities and out of play." "How much danger?" Thomas met her eyes directly. "Enough that I'd get your daughter somewhere safe before you handle the transfer to secure storage. Do you have anyone who could take her for a few weeks?" Rachel thought about her sister who'd stopped returning calls, her mother who'd moved to Florida and sent birthday cards. "No." "Then we'll have to protect her here." "But Rachel, kids are leverage. If someone wants those diamonds badly enough, they'll use Mia to get them. You need to be prepared for that possibility." The words made Rachel's blood ice. She looked at Mia, innocently coloring a picture of the Diamond Princess in her imaginary ice palace, oblivious to the real dangers her mother's discovery had created. "What do I do?" "You let me help you. Starting now." They moved to the secure cabin that afternoon, Thomas driving them in his vehicle while Marcus followed in Rachel's car. The cabin was isolated, invisible from any road, surrounded by forests that would make approach difficult for anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. It was also small, 2 rooms, basic amenities with heat. But it had locks that worked, sightlines Thomas approved, and distance from anyone who might be watching. Marcus helped them settle in, bringing supplies he'd purchased, food, firewood, flashlights. Before leaving, he pulled Rachel aside. "This is getting complicated fast. You sure you want to continue? You could walk away, let the county auction the Ice Palace, disappear back to Minneapolis, and give up $310 million? And give up the danger that comes with it. Money's wonderful, but it doesn't help if you're dead." Rachel thought about the eviction notice, about sleeping in her car, about Mia's face when they'd had to choose between heat and food. "I've been poor my entire life. I've watched my daughter go hungry because I couldn't afford groceries. I've made decisions no mother should have to make. If there's a chance this inheritance can change that, I have to take it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then be smarter than Magnus was. He let secrets isolate him. Let protection become prison. Don't make his mistakes." After he left, Rachel stood in the cabin watching darkness settle through trees, thinking about Magnus dying alone, about 70 years spent hiding diamonds that could have bought comfort, but instead bought only fear. She was starting to understand why he'd called them a burden rather than a treasure. Mia tugged her hand. "Mama, is this our new house?" "For a little while, baby, until things are safe." "When will things be safe?" Rachel pulled her daughter close, breathed in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "Soon, I promise." The lie tasted familiar. She'd been telling Mia things would be okay for months. Now she had the resources to make it true, if she could just survive long enough to access them. Outside, winter darkness swallowed the forest. Inside, Rachel started a fire in the wood stove, made dinner from canned goods Marcus had brought, tried to create normalcy from circumstances that were anything but normal. Thomas Rivera would return tomorrow to begin implementing security protocols. Elizabeth Crane would file her court petition. Dr. Chun would complete her authentication report. The machinery of legal legitimacy was grinding into motion. All Rachel had to do was survive the grinding. She checked the locks twice before bed, positioned furniture to block the door, kept her phone charged and ready. Mia fell asleep quickly, exhausted from another day of upheaval. Rachel lay awake, counting her daughter's breaths, watching shadows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Somewhere in Ely, the Ice Palace waited with its vault and its secrets and its $310 million in diamonds that had transformed Rachel's life from one kind of survival to another. She just had to figure out how to stay alive long enough to enjoy the transformation. The first threat arrived on day 7 at the cabin. Rachel found it tucked under the windshield wiper of her car when she went out to retrieve supplies Thomas had left in the trunk, a plain white envelope with no markings, no return address, just her name printed in block letters. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "We know what you found. We know where you are. Give us half, and we'll let you keep the rest. Refuse, and you'll regret it." No signature, no contact information, just a threat hanging in air like smoke. Rachel brought it to Thomas immediately. He examined it with professional detachment, noting the generic paper, the laser-printed text, the complete absence of identifying features. Someone's fishing. They might know about the diamonds, might just suspect. Either way, this is amateur hour. Professionals don't send notes, they take action. He pulled out his phone, photographed the letter. But amateurs can still be dangerous, especially if they're desperate. "Did you touch this with bare hands?" "Yes, just now." "Then your prints are on it, which is fine. Establishes chain of custody if we need to report it. I'm sending this to a contact at the FBI field office in Minneapolis. Threatening communications regarding stolen property might trigger federal interest, which could actually help your case." How does more law enforcement attention help? Thomas's smile was grim. Because if the feds are investigating, legitimate criminals back off. Nobody wants federal scrutiny. And it gives Elizabeth leverage. She can argue you're cooperating with authorities, acting in good faith, trying to establish legal ownership rather than hiding stolen property. He made the call while Rachel stood, trying to process how her life had become something requiring FBI involvement. 2 weeks ago, her biggest problem had been scraping together rent money. Now she was navigating threats from unknown criminals over diamonds worth more than most people would earn in 1,000 lifetimes. Mia appeared in the doorway, still sleepy from her afternoon nap. "Mama, who's Thomas talking to?" "Just work friends, baby. Nothing to worry about." But worry was becoming Rachel's constant companion. She worried about every car that drove past on the distant road, every stranger she saw in Ely when they went into town for supplies, every phone call from unknown numbers. The wealth that should have brought security had instead brought paranoia that made sleep difficult and relaxation impossible. Elizabeth called that evening with news. "The court approved my petition for interim funding. You'll have access to $150,000 within 5 days, pending verification that the diamonds remain secured. That should cover immediate security needs and living expenses while we establish ownership. Relief flooded through Rachel so powerfully she had to sit down. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. The judge also ordered a hearing in 3 weeks where you'll need to appear and testify about how you acquire the diamonds. Swedish authorities have been notified through proper diplomatic channels. If they want to contest ownership, they'll have opportunity to present their case. What are the chances they contest? Hard to say. The Stockholm Diamond Exchange doesn't exist anymore. Its successor institutions might claim interest, but 73 years is a long time. The Swedish government might decide pursuing this is more trouble than it's worth, especially since you have documentation showing the diamonds were stolen from the exchange, not from the Swedish people. We'll know more after the hearing. The hearing. 3 weeks to prepare testimony about inheritance and discovery and Magnus letters. 3 weeks for word to spread further, for more threats to arrive, for the danger to escalate. Elizabeth, someone left a threat at the cabin today. Thomas has it. I know. He called me. Rachel, this is exactly why you need professional security and why getting the diamonds into bonded custody is critical. As long as you physically possess them, your target. Once they're in professional storage with guards and alarms and legal protections, the threat decreases substantially. When can we move them? Thomas is arranging transport for tomorrow. Armored car, armed guards, direct transfer to Midwest Secure Vaults in Duluth. They specialize in high-value storage, jewelry, art, documents. The diamonds will be safer there than anywhere you could protect them yourself. Tomorrow, one more day of being personally responsible for $310 million. One more day of watching shadows and jumping at sounds and imagining armed men breaking through the cabin door. Rachel could survive one more day. The transfer happened at dawn, orchestrated with military precision. Thomas arrived with 2 additional security personnel, both former police, both armed. They drove to the Ice Palace in convoy, retrieved the diamonds from the basement vault with speed that suggested they'd planned every movement. Rachel watched them load cloth bags into reinforced cases, watched the cases loaded into an armored vehicle, watched her entire inheritance disappear into steel walls and locked compartments. The relief was physical, tension draining from shoulders that had carried impossible weight for too long. Mia had stayed at the cabin with Dorothy, the elderly babysitter Marcus trusted. Rachel had explained it as a boring adult errand, nothing exciting. The child accepted this with the easy trust of childhood that hadn't yet learned adults lied to protect you from truths you couldn't handle. Back at the cabin, Thomas outlined the new security protocol. The diamonds are now in bonded custody under joint control. You and Elizabeth both have to authorize any access. Nobody can touch them without both signatures, which means nobody can force you alone to hand them over. You're no longer the single point of failure in the security chain. But I'm still a target until ownership is established. Yes, but a less valuable one. People who wanted to steal the diamonds outright now have to go through multiple layers of security. That's harder, riskier, more likely to fail. Most criminals will move on to easier targets. Most, not all. Rachel heard what Thomas wasn't saying. Some people would persist, would decide she was still worth threatening or hurting, would escalate rather than retreat. How long until I'm safe? Thomas's expression was honest in a way that scared her more than lies would have. Maybe never completely. Once people know you have access to $310 million, that knowledge doesn't disappear even after the money is spent. You'll always be someone worth targeting for kidnapping, extortion, robbery. Welcome to the complications of wealth. The words settled heavy. Rachel had imagined money solving problems, not creating different ones. She'd been naive about what inheriting millions would mean for daily life, for safety, for the simple ability to move through the world without constant fear. What do? You make smart choices. You hire permanent security eventually. You don't flash wealth or make yourself obvious. You teach your daughter to be careful about what she tells strangers. You live differently than you did when you were poor, because poor people have different dangers than wealthy people. That afternoon, Elizabeth called with the first payment from the interim funding, $150,000 deposited into an account she'd helped Rachel establish. The number on the screen looked unreal, like a typo or a glitch. Rachel had to check 3 times to believe it. She paid Thomas immediately, $15,000 for services rendered and retainer for ongoing protection. Paid Dr. Chun the $8,000 owed for authentication services. Set aside $10,000 for Elizabeth's immediate costs. That left $117,000, more money than Rachel had ever controlled in her life. The temptation was overwhelming. Buy a house, buy a car, buy security and comfort, and all the things poverty had denied. But Elizabeth's advice echoed. Don't spend like you're wealthy until you actually are. Right now, you're someone with access to a loan against potential inheritance. If ownership isn't established, you'll owe everything back. So Rachel moved carefully. She rented a small house in Duluth under a 6-month lease. $2,400 per month. Expensive but secure and close to Elizabeth's office. Bought basic furniture from IKEA, basic clothes for herself and Mia, enrolled her daughter in a good school that would provide stability. The house felt enormous after the cabin, after sleeping in the car, after the cramped Minneapolis apartment. Mia ran through rooms with joy that broke Rachel's heart. This simple middle-class existence was luxury to a child who'd been homeless a month ago. Mama, we have 2 bathrooms. Yes, baby. In your own bedroom. Can I decorate it? However you want. They spent an afternoon at Target. Mia choosing curtains and bedding and posters. Rachel buying with the strange dissonance of having money, but not yet believing it was real. The total came to $847, a number that would have been catastrophic a month ago, that now barely registered against the $117,000 in the account. Poverty had taught her to feel guilty about every dollar spent. Wealth, even temporary wealth, hadn't yet taught her not to. The hearing arrived 3 weeks later on a January morning, so cold that walking from the parking lot to the courthouse felt like crossing an Arctic wasteland. Rachel wore a suit Elizabeth had helped her choose, professional but not expensive, respectful of the court without suggesting wealth she didn't yet have. Inside the courtroom, she saw faces she'd been told to expect. Elizabeth at the plaintiff's table, looking confident and prepared. A representative from the Swedish consulate. An attorney named Anders Bergstrom who'd flown from Minneapolis specifically for this hearing. Dr. Chun in the gallery, ready to testify about authentication. Thomas Rivera stationed near the door, watching for threats. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Margaret Walsh, reputation for fairness but low tolerance for nonsense. She reviewed the case file while everyone waited, then looked up with sharp eyes that suggested she'd already formed preliminary opinions. This is a highly unusual case. Ms. Kovacs, you're claiming ownership of diamonds worth approximately $310 million based on inheritance from Magnus Lindstrom, who acquired them under questionable circumstances in 1952. The Swedish government, through Mr. Bergstrom, is asserting that these diamonds remain stolen property regardless of time elapsed. Ms. Crane, you're arguing adverse possession and good faith ownership. Have I summarized correctly? Elizabeth stood. Yes, Your Honor. We're prepared to demonstrate that Ms. Kovacs inherited these diamonds legally, that her great-uncle Magnus Lindstrom protected them in good faith, believing they were family property, and that 73 years of possession combined with the death of all original parties establishes legitimate ownership under Minnesota law. Anders Bergstrom stood, his English accented but precise. Your Honor, Sweden maintains that stolen property remains stolen regardless of time elapsed. The Stockholm Diamond Exchange theft of 1951 was a crime. These diamonds are proceeds of that crime. We request they be returned to Sweden for proper disposition. Judge Walsh looked between them. This will require extensive testimony. Let's begin. Ms. Crane, call your first witness. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in legal testimony. Elizabeth called Rachel first, walking her through the inheritance notification, the journey to Ely, discovering Magnus' letters, opening the vault. Rachel answered carefully, sticking to facts, avoiding speculation. Anders Bergstrom cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint Rachel as opportunist who'd stumbled on a stolen property and was now trying to legitimize theft through legal maneuvering. Ms. Kovacs, when you discovered these diamonds, did you contact Swedish authorities? No. Did you contact any law enforcement? Not immediately. I contacted a gemologist to verify they were real, then an attorney to understand my legal options. So your first instinct was to find ways to profit from stolen property, not to report the crime. Elizabeth objected, argumentative and assumes facts, not an evidence. My client inherited property from a legal will. She had no reason to believe she was required to contact Swedish authorities. Judge Walsh sustained the objection, but looked thoughtful. The point had landed regardless of a ruling. Dr. Chun testified next, explaining the authentication process, confirming the diamonds matched 1951 documentation, establishing they were genuine investment-grade stones worth approximately $310 million at current market value. Under cross-examination, Anders Bergstrom got her to acknowledge the diamonds were originally property of Stockholm Diamond Exchange, that the 1951 documentation showed they'd been stolen, that no legitimate transfer of ownership appeared in any record. So these are, by definition, stolen property. They were stolen in 1951, yes. Whether they remain legally stolen 73 years later is a question of law, not gemology. The afternoon brought character witnesses. Marcus Webb testified about Magnus Lindstrom's integrity, his belief that he was protecting family legacy rather than hiding criminal proceeds, his specific instructions that the inheritance go to someone who needed it. Magnus wasn't a criminal. He was a man honoring his father's dying request. He spent 70 years protecting those diamonds because he'd promised to, not because he wanted wealth. He died alone rather than sell a single stone. That's not the behavior of a thief. Anders Bergstrom tried to shake Marcus's testimony, but couldn't. The old man had known Magnus for 40 years and spoke with conviction that couldn't be discounted. The final witness was an expert in international property law, Professor Helena Vasquez from the University of Minnesota. Elizabeth had hired her to establish legal precedent for adverse possession of stolen property. Professor Vasquez explained that while criminal law generally holds stolen property remains stolen indefinitely, civil law recognizes that practical reality requires statute of limitations. After sufficient time, particularly when all original parties are deceased, possession can ripen into ownership. In this case, we have 73 years of continuous possession, good faith belief in legitimate ownership, death of all individuals involved in the original theft, and dissolution of the institution victimized by the theft. Under Minnesota law and international precedent, these factors combine to support a finding of legitimate ownership through adverse possession. Anders Bergstrom countered with his own expert, arguing that Swedish law didn't recognize adverse possession of stolen property, that Sweden had never relinquished claim to the diamonds, that international treaties required return of stolen cultural property regardless of time elapsed. Judge Walsh listened to everything, asked sharp questions, took copious notes. When testimony concluded, she announced her decision would come within 30 days. This case requires careful consideration of competing legal principles and international implications. I will not rush to judgment. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Elizabeth pulled Rachel aside. That went as well as could be expected. The judge is taking it seriously, which is good. A quick ruling would have suggested she'd already decided, probably against us. This means she's genuinely weighing the arguments. What are the odds now? Still about 70% in our favor. Bergstrom made good points about Swedish law, but Minnesota law governs property located in Minnesota. The judge knows that. She also knows that returning diamonds to Sweden 73 years after they were stolen serves no practical purpose. Everyone harmed by the theft is dead. Rachel felt cautiously hopeful for the first time in weeks. What happens if we win? Then you own them outright. We can begin liquidation process, selling them through legitimate dealers, establishing provenance documentation, converting diamonds into currency you can actually use. That process will take 6 to 12 months, but the outcome is wealth that changes your life permanently. And if we lose? Elizabeth's expression was honest. Then Sweden gets the diamonds, You owe back the $150,000 interim funding, and you walk away with nothing except the Ice Palace, which you still can't afford to keep because of the back taxes. Losing means returning to exactly where you started. The possibility made Rachel's stomach drop. She'd been living for weeks as if the money was guaranteed, as if security was assured. But it wasn't. Not yet. Everything still balanced on a judge's decision about laws and precedents and questions without clear answers. How do I prepare for that possibility? You hope for the best, but assume nothing until the ruling is final. You don't make any financial commitments you can't reverse. You keep your daughter's life stable but portable. And Rachel, you start thinking about what you'll do if this doesn't work out, because planning for failure is how you survive it. The advice was practical but devastating. Rachel had allowed herself to believe, really believe, that poverty was ending, that the grinding stress of survival was over. Now she had to hold that belief loosely enough that losing wouldn't destroy her. The weeks waiting for the ruling were their own special torture. Rachel maintained routines, taking Mia to school, buying groceries, paying rent from the interim funding, while simultaneously existing in a state of suspended animation where nothing felt real or permanent. Threats continued arriving sporadically. Another note on her car. Time's running out. An anonymous phone call. You can't hide forever. Each one reported to Thomas, to the FBI, to the growing file of evidence that Rachel was being targeted. But no one actually tried anything. The Diamonds were in professional custody. Rachel was under Thomas's protection, and apparently the risk was too high for anyone to escalate from threats to action. On day 27 of waiting, Marcus called with unexpected news. Someone tried to break into the Ice Palace last night. Set off the new alarm system Thomas installed. Police responded, but whoever it was had already fled. They'd cut through the front door lock, got about 10 feet inside before the alarm scared them off. Rachel's blood iced. Did they get to the basement? No, and there's nothing there anyway. The Diamonds are in Duluth. But Rachel, someone thought there was still treasure to steal. That means word has spread further than we hoped. Should I be worried? You should be careful. The judge's ruling is coming soon. Once ownership is established, the immediate danger passes. No point stealing what's legally protected and documented. But until then, you're in the vulnerable period where criminals still think they can grab the prize before the law catches up. That night, Rachel barely slept. She kept imagining men breaking into the house, threatening Mia, demanding diamonds she no longer possessed. Thomas had assured her the Duluth house had better security than the cabin, that the alarm system would alert police instantly, that she was as safe as possible. But as safe as possible wasn't the same as safe. Day 29 brought a call from Elizabeth. The judge is issuing her ruling tomorrow at 10 a.m. She wants all parties present. This is it, Rachel. Tomorrow we find out if you're wealthy or if you're back where you started. Rachel spent that final evening with Mia, playing board games and reading stories, and trying to create normalcy from circumstances that were anything but. Her daughter seemed to sense something important was happening, but didn't ask questions Rachel couldn't answer. At bedtime, Mia's prayers included a new addition. And please let Mama stop being worried all the time. Amen. I'll try, baby. Tomorrow might help with that. Will we stay in this house? The question cut deep because Rachel didn't know. If they won, they could stay anywhere. If they lost, they couldn't stay here. The lease would be impossible to maintain without the interim funding she'd have to repay. We'll figure it out tomorrow. But Mia, whatever happens, we'll be okay. We've survived worse than this. We survived sleeping in the car. Exactly. And if we could survive that, we can survive anything. The words were meant to comfort her daughter, but Rachel found comfort in them too. She'd been poor before discovering the diamonds. If the ruling went against her, she'd be poor again. But she'd also be experienced in survival, skilled in making something from nothing, stubborn enough to keep fighting. The diamonds would be lost. The opportunity would be gone. But Rachel Kovacs would remain, and that had been enough before it would have to be enough again. The courtroom the next morning was more crowded than the hearing. Word had spread that Judge Walsh was ruling on the diamond inheritance case, and curiosity had drawn spectators. Rachel saw faces she recognized from Ely, people who'd heard about Magnus' mysterious heir and wanted to witness the resolution. Judge Walsh entered promptly at 10 a.m., expression giving nothing away. Everyone stood, then sat when she gestured. She opened a folder, adjusted her glasses, began reading from prepared remarks. This case presents fascinating questions at the intersection of criminal law, property law, and international legal principles. I've spent considerable time reviewing precedent, consulting with colleagues, and wrestling with competing values of justice and practicality. The facts are not disputed. In 1951, approximately 8,000 carats of investment-grade diamonds were stolen from Stockholm Diamond Exchange. Per Lindstrom, working as a security guard, intercepted the stolen diamonds and gave them to his son Magnus with instructions to protect them. Magnus Lindstrom brought the diamonds to the United States in 1952 and held them in secure storage until his death in 2024. Upon his death, the diamonds passed to his great-niece, Rachel Kovacs, through a legally executed will. Sweden argues these diamonds remain stolen property and should be returned. Ms. Kovacs argues that 73 years of possession, combined with good faith belief in legitimate ownership, establishes legal title through adverse possession. Both arguments have merit, but I must decide based on Minnesota law, which governs property located within Minnesota's borders. And Minnesota law recognizes that possession can ripen into ownership when certain conditions are met. Rachel's heart pounded. The judge was building towards something, but whether victory or defeat remained unclear. In this case, we have continuous possession for 73 years, far exceeding Minnesota's statute of limitations for property claims. We have documented good faith belief by Magnus Lindstrom that he was protecting family property, not hiding criminal proceeds. We have the death of all individuals directly involved in the original theft. We have dissolution of the victimized institution. Stockholm Diamond Exchange no longer exists in its 1951 form. And critically, we have no evidence that Sweden ever attempted to locate or recover these specific diamonds during the intervening 7 decades. Under these circumstances, I find that Ms. Kovacs has established legitimate ownership through adverse possession. The diamonds are hereby declared her legal property, free from Swedish claims. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Rachel sat frozen, not quite believing what she'd heard. Elizabeth grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. Across the aisle, Anders Bergstrom looked disappointed but not surprised. Judge Walsh banged her gavel. Order. I'm not finished. However, I am ordering that 10% of the diamond's appraised value be paid to a fund supporting Swedish cultural preservation, as recognition that these diamonds originated from Swedish property, even if current ownership belongs to Ms. Kovacs. This payment shall be made from proceeds of any diamond sales before Ms. Kovacs receives her share. Additionally, all diamonds must be sold through legitimate dealers with full documentation of provenance. Ms. Kovacs is prohibited from selling to any buyer who cannot establish legal authority to purchase. This is to prevent the diamonds from entering gray markets or criminal enterprise. With those conditions, I hereby grant Ms. Kovacs full legal ownership. The interim funding of $150,000 is converted to a draw against her ownership. She may keep it without repayment. This case is closed. The gavel came down with finality. Elizabeth was talking rapidly about implications and next steps and timeline for liquidation. Anders Bergstrom was gathering his papers with professional composure. Thomas was scanning the room for threats. But Rachel just sat, trying to process what had just happened. She'd won. The diamonds were legally hers. $310 million, minus 10% to Sweden, minus legal fees, minus authentication costs. Maybe $250 million when everything was calculated. $250 million. More money than comprehension allowed. More than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. Enough to change everything about Mia's future, about their security, about the grinding poverty that had defined Rachel's entire existence. She'd won. The realization hit in waves. First relief, then joy, then overwhelming gratitude, then fear about what came next. Well-solved problems, but created others. She'd have to learn how to manage money, how to invest, how to protect it from people who try to take it. She'd have to figure out who to trust and who to avoid and how to teach Mia values when they never had to worry about money again. But those were good problems. Rich people problems. The kind of complications poverty made impossible. Elizabeth pulled her toward the hallway where media had gathered. Apparently, the case had attracted attention Rachel hadn't noticed. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions about the diamonds and Magnus and how it felt to inherit $310 million. Thomas intervened, creating space, pushing through the crowd toward an exit. They emerged into January cold that felt refreshing after the courtroom's stifling air. In the parking lot, away from cameras, Elizabeth outlined next steps. We begin liquidation immediately. I've already contacted 3 major diamond dealers who specialize in estate sales. They'll bid on your collection. Highest bidder gets exclusive rights to sell. That process will take 2 to 3 months. Meanwhile, you'll continue to have access to interim funding and eventually the bulk payment when diamonds are sold. How much will I actually clear? Elizabeth did mental math. After the 10% to Sweden, after my 15% fee, after all costs and taxes, you should net approximately $200 million. Maybe slightly more if the diamonds sell above appraisal value. $200 million. The number was absurd, impossible, life-altering. Rachel had to sit down on the parking lot curb, head between knees, breathing carefully to avoid hyperventilating. Mia would never be hungry again, would never wear clothes from thrift stores because new ones were unaffordable, would never attend underfunded schools or live in dangerous neighborhoods, or learn to count pennies before buying groceries. Rachel would never feel the particular panic of rent being due with no money to pay it, would never choose between electricity and food, would never stand in line at food banks or apply for jobs she was overqualified for or absorb the casual cruelty of employers who treated poor workers as disposable. That life was over. Not because she'd worked hard or made smart choices or deserved it. She'd worked hard and made smart choices her entire life and stayed poor anyway. This was ending because a great uncle she'd never met had spent 70 years protecting diamonds he'd inherited from a father who'd stolen them to prevent greater theft. The moral complexity was dizzying. The diamonds represented crime, but also justice. Theft, but also protection. Wrong choices that somehow led to right outcomes. Magnus had destroyed his relationship with his sister to protect his father's secret. Rachel was benefiting from that destruction, profiting from family trauma she hadn't caused and couldn't fix. But she also hadn't asked for any of this, hadn't chosen to be born into poverty, hadn't chosen to have her husband leave, or her jobs disappear, or her daughter go hungry. When opportunity arrived in the form of an abandoned ice palace and $310 million in hidden diamonds, refusing it wouldn't make her noble, just poor. Elizabeth helped her stand. Rachel, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to start thinking practically. Where do you want to live long-term? What do you want to do with your life now that you don't have to work for survival? How do you want to raise Mia with wealth instead of scarcity? Questions Rachel had no answers for. She'd been so focused on surviving until the ruling that she hadn't planned for what came after winning. I don't know. I can't think about that yet. That's fine. Take a few days. Process this. But soon we'll need to make decisions about financial management, investments, trust for Mia's future. Wealth requires planning, or it disappears faster than you'd believe. Over the next 3 months, Rachel learned more about money management than she'd learned in her entire life previously. She met with financial advisors, wealth managers, estate planning attorneys. Established trust for Mia that would pay for education, housing, healthcare regardless of what happened to Rachel. Created investment portfolios designed to generate income without depleting principal. The diamond sold for $318 million, above the appraisal, driven by competitive bidding from dealers who recognized their exceptional quality. After all fees and payments, Rachel received a wire transfer for $207 million. The number appeared in her bank account one Tuesday morning in April. Rachel stared at it on her phone for 10 minutes, certain it was an error, that someone would call and say there'd been a mistake. No one called. The money was real. She was officially, irrevocably wealthy. The first thing she did was pay off the Ice Palace's back taxes, $14, $750 that had seemed impossible 3 months ago now felt like a rounding error. She took legal ownership of the building, then donated it to the city of Ely with instructions it be converted into a community center. Let it serve the purpose Magnus had never quite figured out, bringing people together instead of isolating them. The second thing was buying a house in Minneapolis. Not a mansion, not something ostentatious, just a comfortable 4-bedroom in a good school district that Mia could grow up in without feeling either deprived or spoiled. She paid cash, $550,000, felt visceral satisfaction at never owing anyone money for shelter again. The third thing was establishing the Lindstrom Family Foundation with $50 million in endowment, dedicated to supporting families experiencing homelessness. If Rachel's suffering could be transformed into help for others facing similar circumstances, then maybe the whole complicated moral chain that led from Stockholm to Ely to wealth had some redemption in it. Mia adjusted to wealth with the flexibility of childhood. She was happy to have her own room, her own toys, new clothes when she needed them. But she also remembered what it felt like to sleep in the car, to count pennies for groceries, to watch her mother cry from stress. Those memories would shape her in ways wealth couldn't erase. Rachel hoped that was good, hoped that remembering poverty would make Mia kinder, more generous, more aware that wealth was luck and circumstance as much as merit. But she also hoped Mia would simply enjoy being a kid without the weight of adult financial stress crushing her childhood. 6 months after the ruling, Rachel sat on the porch of her new house watching Mia play in the yard with friends from school. Normal suburban life, unremarkable except for how remarkable it felt after everything they'd survived. Marcus had visited the previous week, checking on how they'd settled into Minneapolis. He brought gifts for Mia and wisdom for Rachel about handling wealth without letting it corrupt. Magnus spent 70 years protecting those diamonds. You spent 6 months fighting to keep them. Now you've got the rest of your life to figure out what they're for. Use them to build something that matters. That's how you honor everyone who sacrificed to get them to you. Good advice from a man who'd spent 40 years being loyal to someone else's secret. Rachel was trying to follow it. The foundation was a start, but she wanted to do more. Maybe go back to school, study social work or nonprofit management. Maybe create programs that help people escape poverty instead of just surviving it. The specifics would come with time. For now, she was learning to exist without the constant low-level panic that had defined her adult life. Learning to buy groceries without calculating cost. Learning to plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. Learning to believe that security could be permanent instead of temporary. It was harder than she'd expected. Poverty had taught her not to trust good fortune, to always prepare for disaster. Wealth hadn't yet taught her that preparation could be strategic rather than fearful. But she was learning, and she had resources now, therapists to help process trauma, financial advisors to manage complexity, security to protect against new threats that came with wealth. She could afford to take time, to make mistakes, to figure out who she wanted to be now that survival wasn't the only question that mattered. Mia called from the yard, wanting to show Rachel a bug she'd found. Rachel went down to examine it, some kind of beetle iridescent in the afternoon sun. Mia was delighted by the colors, by the way it crawled across her palm, by the simple magic of small living things. Can we keep it? Bugs are happier outside, baby, but we can watch it for a while before we let it go. They sat on the grass together, observing the beetle's journey across Mia's hand. Such a small moment, so ordinary. But that was what wealth had bought. Not luxury or excess, but the ability to spend afternoon watching bugs with her daughter instead of working 3 jobs to cover rent. The simplest things were often the most valuable. That evening, after Mia was asleep, Rachel pulled out Magnus' original letter, the one he'd left in the locked room explaining about the diamonds. She reread it slowly, thinking about the man who'd written it, about the 70 years of isolation he'd endured, about the choice to leave everything to a stranger rather than die with his secrets. The letter ended with words Rachel had read dozens of times, but hadn't fully understood until now. Use them to give your daughter what my secrets prevented Astrid's family from receiving. Use them to build the life my father's choice prevented me from building. Rachel had done that. She'd built security for Mia, built a foundation to help others, build a life that honored the sacrifice without being destroyed by it. Magnus would be pleased, she thought, or at least satisfied that his inheritance had gone to someone who'd use it instead of just protecting it. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in the safe where she kept important documents, birth certificates, the house deed, legal papers from the diamond case. Someday Mia would be old enough to read it, to understand the full story of where their wealth came from, to make her own decisions about what that meant. But for now, Rachel was content to let her daughter be a child, innocent, protected, free from the weight of knowing how close they'd come to disaster, how lucky they'd been, how easily everything could have gone differently. The next morning brought an email from Elizabeth. The Ely Echo wants to do a follow-up article about your foundation. Interested in an interview. Rachel thought about it, about whether she wanted to be public about her wealth, about the risks and benefits of visibility. Then she thought about other families sleeping in cars, other mothers choosing between food and rent, other children learning poverty's lessons too young. If her story could help even one family believe that circumstances could change, that survival was possible, that impossible good fortune sometimes arrived when you needed it most, wasn't that worth the risk of publicity? She typed her response, "Yes, I'm interested. Let's talk about how to tell this story right." Because it wasn't just her story. It was Magnus' story and Per's story and every person who'd protected those diamonds across 73 years. It was the story of poverty and wealth and the moral complexity of inheriting both. It was the story of choices made by people long dead, creating consequences for people not yet born. And most importantly, it was a story about a single mother and her daughter who'd been days away from homelessness when a dead relative she'd never met reached across decades to save them. That kind of miracle deserved to be shared, even with all its complications. Rachel looked at the photo on her desk, Mia on moving day at the new house, grinning with joy at having her own room. Behind her, boxes labeled books and toys and clothes, evidence of a life that had expanded from what fit in a car, trunk to what filled a 4-bedroom house. They'd come so far. They'd survived so much. They'd been given an impossible gift and were trying to use it wisely. That was all anyone could ask. Rachel picked up her phone to call Mia for breakfast, to start another ordinary day in their extraordinary new life, to keep building the future Magnus had made possible. Outside, spring sun warmed Minneapolis streets. Inside, a mother and daughter prepare to face whatever came next with resources they'd never had before and resilience they'd earned the hard way. The Ice Palace in Ely stood empty but repurposed, waiting to serve its community. The diamonds that had hidden there for 15 years were sold, transformed from stones into currency, into security. And somewhere, Rachel hoped, Magnus Lindstrom was satisfied that his 70-year burden had become someone else's blessing. The story wasn't perfect. The morality was complicated. The source of wealth was questionable at best. But Mia would grow up fed and housed and educated. Other families would receive help through the foundation. Rachel would spend the rest of her life trying to deserve the luck that had saved them. That was enough. That had to be enough. And in the quiet moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she deserved this wealth, if accepting it made her complicit in crimes committed decades before her birth, Rachel reminded herself of sleeping in the car with her daughter, of choosing between heat and food, of the particular desperation of poverty that makes survival itself feel like victory. She hadn't caused the Stockholm theft, hadn't asked to be Magnus' heir, hadn't chosen the complicated moral inheritance she'd received. But she'd made the choice to claim it anyway, to use it despite its origins, to transform burden into blessing through conscious effort and careful stewardship. That choice was hers. The consequences were hers. The responsibility was hers. And for the first time in her life, Rachel Kovacs had resources equal to her responsibilities. Epilogue. 3 years later. The Lindstrom Family Foundation's annual gala was held at a downtown Minneapolis hotel, attended by philanthropists and city officials and families whose lives had been changed by the foundation's programs. Rachel stood at the podium wearing a dress that cost more than her first car, looking out at faces that represented different versions of success. But her speech wasn't about wealth. It was about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, sleeping in her car outside an abandoned ice palace, making decisions from desperation, surviving day by day. The path from poverty to security isn't smooth, she said, reading from notes she'd practiced all week. It's marked by fear and luck and choices you can't unmake. I got lucky, impossibly lucky. Most people don't. That's why this foundation exists. To be someone else's luck when they need it most. Applause filled the room. Mia sat in the front row beside Marcus Webb, who'd traveled from Ely for the event. Dorothy was there too, the babysitter who'd helped during the most dangerous weeks. Elizabeth Crane sat with Thomas Rivera, both of them part of the team that had protected Rachel through her transformation from poverty to wealth. After the speech, after the dinner, after the conversations with donors and beneficiaries, Rachel found herself alone on the hotel balcony, looking out at the Minneapolis skyline lit against the night sky. 3 years ago, she'd been evicted from an apartment somewhere in this city. 3 years ago, her biggest hope had been finding a motel room she could afford for one night. Now she owned a house, had $150 million still invested in growing, ran a foundation that helped hundreds of families annually. Mia was thriving in school, making friends, learning to navigate wealth without being defined by it. Life had transformed in ways Rachel still sometimes couldn't believe. But the memory of poverty remained sharp, useful, grounding. She never wanted to forget what it felt like to be desperate, to have no options, to make choices from fear rather than freedom. That memory made her better at her work, better at understanding the families the foundation served, better at knowing which programs actually helped versus which just looked good on paper. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Mom, when can we go home? This party is boring and I have school tomorrow." Rachel smiled. Something's never changed. Galas were boring when you were 9 years old, whether your mother had $150 million or $150. She texted back, 20 minutes. Then ice cream on the way home. Deal. Love you. Love you too, baby. Rachel took one more look at the city spread below, at the lights marking lives she'd never know, at the evidence of human complexity and struggle and triumph all mixed together. Then she went inside to collect her daughter, to keep the promises she'd made to Magnus, to herself, to everyone who'd helped them survive. The ice palace was gone, converted to community space. The diamonds were sold, transformed to currency, then invested for maximum good. But the story continued. Would always continue as long as Rachel used her wealth to remember her poverty, as long as Mia grew up understanding that luck and privilege required responsibility, as long as the Lindstrom name meant helping rather than hoarding. Magnus had protected a secret for 70 years. Rachel would protect his legacy for the rest of her life. That was the real inheritance. Not the diamonds, but the obligation they carried. Not the wealth, but the wisdom to use it well. And standing in that hotel ballroom, surrounded by proof that money could be transformed into meaning, Rachel finally understood what Magnus had tried to tell her in his letter. Some burdens become blessings when you choose to carry them right. The end. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.